I shouldn't say a part, he was mingling with the swamp out there, right, in Washington, D.C., and been in the private sector for 30 years. So this is a gentleman that just hasn't just served in government, private sector for 30 years. He has 4 children, 9 grandchildren. Now, he did his undergraduate work at Arizona State University. It's okay. But he did it's okay, right? So he's Sun Devil. But he got his master's degree from Brigham Young University, BYU. I'm a Utah Ute. So we're friends and all until we start talking about he went to BYU. Anyways, guys, I'm excited for you to hear from him. Individual wanting to be your next governor, Arizona's next governor, and holding the line. Please help me welcome Matt Salmon.
I am wishing so bad because a couple weeks ago I was at a chapel where Shane gave a speech to, gosh, it was over 1,000 people. And he had this book that he opened up, was the Constitution, and flames came out of it. Was anybody there? I wish I had that book right now, Shane. The book with the flames coming out of it. Before I start talking about some of the things that make my political thought, the things that have really framed my political belief are the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. One of my favorite treatises, though, that I ever read. How many of you ever read The Law by Frederick Bastiat? One of my favorite treatises ever. And he talked about legalized plunder. And that's what it is when you rob people to fund programs for government. It's legalized plunder. One of my other favorites, how many of you have ever read The Creature from Jekyll Island? Talked about the creation of the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, was unconstitutionally done. And every year that I was in Congress, I sponsored legislation to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and also was Rand Paul to audit the Federal Reserve if we couldn't get it removed. I also want to tell you that while I was in Congress, Shane's absolutely right. For years and years and years, the federal government has been usurping more and more and more responsibility. Unjustly so and unconstitutionally so. And we have a right and a responsibility to stand up and assert our state's rights. Our founding fathers, they envisioned everything. And we all understand the separation of powers when we talk about the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. But how about that vertical separation of powers between the federal government and the states? Incredibly, incredibly important. So I first ran for the state legislature in 1990 after I worked 13 years for the phone company, Mountain Bell. Anybody remember that company? I was a construction manager for Mountain Bell, and then I became the risk manager for the whole company, US West. And then I ran for the state legislature in 1990, and then served there for 4 years. And some of the things I was able to get done there, how many of you like charter schools? That was my bill. I sponsored the legislation to create charter schools. How many of you like concealed carry permits? That was my bill. I sponsored legislation to create concealed carry permits. And then later on, they went one better and they created the constitutional carry, which is even better. But the fact that we have these CCWs today is still really important because when you have one, you get reciprocity with other states. You can go to other states and you can still carry concealed and be within the law. And so I'm proud to sponsor that. One other piece of legislation, and I only say it kind of tongue-in-cheek. How many of you ever heard of the Stupid Motorist Law? Yeah? That was my bill too. And the reason I put it together, we were having these floods every year. And some idiot with a four-wheel drive truck would always think, oh, those signs don't mean anything to me. Do not enter when flooded. And they'd have barricades around. I can get through that. I'm a macho guy, I can get through it. And so they'd go through on their truck, and they get in the middle of the thing, and they get stuck. And then we would pay tens of thousands of dollars to rescue their sorry butts. And so I sponsored legislation saying, if you do that, you're going to pay for your own rescue. And I think it just gets back to personal responsibility. Government is not there. In fact, John Wayne was my icon in life. Who likes John Wayne? My favorite quote of John Wayne, I think, epitomizes what goes on in government every day. He said, life is tough, but it's a lot tougher when you're stupid. And that's the way it goes with government. These guys are stupid, and they think that we don't understand it. So anyway, in 1994, I ran for Congress for the first time. I had never even been to Washington, D.C. I didn't know anything about it. Nobody in my family had ever run for office before. And I ran for Congress during the contract with America. And folks came to me and said, well, what do you think about term limits? I said, well, I like it. I don't think people should be there to create a career. I think that people should have limited terms. And so I signed a promise that year that I would serve 3 terms and come home. You know how many people signed that promise? 100. You know how many kept it? 5 of us. In the whole country out of the 100. I was the only one from Arizona. Because I believe in 2 things. Number 1, I believe in term limits. If it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for the Congress too. And I think a lot of people that go there for the right reasons end up staying for the wrong reasons. They get corrupted by the system. And they get wealthy. You're right. I saw person after person that went there and they came out of Congress with a lot more money than they had when they started. You go explain that one to me. But the fact is, I went there during the contract with America and we did some good things. How many of you know or remember that we actually balanced the budget? We balanced the budget for the first time in 40 years. In 1997, we did it 3 years in a row. And when I left, we actually had a surplus, $140 billion. And then a guy came in George W. Bush, and he blew everything. He blew it all out of the water. They started deficit spending again. When I first went to Congress, one of the reasons that I went was because we had a $4.5 billion debt. And I was apoplectic about it. My head was about to explode. $4.5 billion. This is nuts. We're putting that onto my children and grandchildren. So I ran to stop that. And then I left with a balanced budget. I felt pretty good. Left on my term limit pledge, came back home, went back to the private sector. And then they started spending like a bunch of drunken sailors on shore leave all over again and running the deficit up again. Started with Bush, then it went on through Obama. And I sat out. Okay, let me just talk about while I was in Congress. A few awards that I got. 1, Citizens Against Government Waste. They ranked every member of Congress, 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, on how you vote to cut taxes and cut spending, whether or not you're really a fiscal conservative. Out of 435 House members and 100 senators, 535 members of Congress, I was ranked number 4 in the whole place. And I got the Taxpayer Heroes Award. Okay, so anyway, I left Congress, I came home, I served in the private sector, I sat it out for 12 years, and then a strange thing happened. Barack Obama got elected to be president of the United States. And I wanted to kick my TV in every time he came on the TV. And so I got, you felt the same way. I thought it'd be cheaper to run for Congress to keep replacing those TVs. So I ran again in 2012 after sitting out for 12 years, and I went back promising to repeal Obamacare and do everything that I could to stop this guy dead in his tracks, who was the most pro-abortion, most gun-confiscating, most expanding government president we probably had up until that time. And I got to tell you something, Joe Biden's just a dumb Obama anyway. And he's just a dumber version of Obama. And a lot of people were saying this is Obama's 3rd term. But anyway, so I went back to Washington, and I found out that a lot of things had changed since the contract with America. We had a lot of wimps in the Republican Party. A lot of guys that wanted to push out watered down Democrat policies instead of fighting for the Constitution. And so I got really, really frustrated. After I was there for several months, we were at a conference. It was a retreat in Hershey, Pennsylvania, with all the Republicans on the House side. And a guy comes up to me, Jim Jordan. You know who he is. Jim Jordan comes up and says, Matt, we're frustrated as heck. We're not doing the things that we promised we were going to do. And our leadership won't let the right things come to the floor. So what can we do? So I said, let's start a group. And that night, Ron DeSantis, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and I, we started the Freedom Congress. Because we were sick and tired of Republicans making promises that they didn't keep. Well, we were able to drive some good things to happen. One of the things that Shane talked about was the idea that Congress passes these laws, these nebulous, wonderful sounding laws with no meaning whatsoever, and then passing all the authority to the government agencies to put out the rules, which have the effect of being laws. We were frustrated with that. So I was one of the sponsors of something called the REINS Act. You know what that is? The REINS Act says basically this. Once you pass a law, and then it goes to the agency to promulgate the rules have to come back to Congress for an up or down vote. That's something that's really important because the people that are elected are the ones supposed to be accountable. Non-elected bureaucrats aren't supposed to be making the law. And then you can unelect people when you see the crap that's coming down. And so that RAISE Act was really important. But we couldn't ever get Obamacare, the repeal of Obamacare to the floor. So after our first meeting of the Freedom Caucus, they nominated 3 of us, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and me, to go into John Boehner's office and tell him we had the votes to vacate the chair, basically to remove him as speaker. And so we went into his office, we stared him down, and we said, John, the jig is up, you gotta leave. And 2 days later, he resigned. We stood down. We stood up for the most powerful Republican in Congress. The reason I tell you this stuff is because it all leads to where I am today. I don't care if it's a Republican, I don't care if it's a Democrat, I don't care who it is. If they're not doing their job for the constituents, if they are not standing up for the Constitution, I'm going to pitch holy hell. And I'm going to do everything that I can to do a course correction. I'm going to fight. And right now, Shane and I were talking about this before the meeting, talking about this idea of nullification. In essence, you can bundle it up in one phrase that Nancy Reagan put together. Just say no. Yeah. Just say no to the federal government. You're not coming into my state, you're not going to do that. And I'll give you some illustrations of what that really means. You've heard Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the country, who said that they're going to go ahead and have FBI agents start investigating school board members to see if they're domestic terrorists when they come and exercise their freedom of speech at a school board meeting. You know what my answer to Merrick Garland is going to be when I'm governor if you try something like that? Let's see how well the FBI agents do getting by the National Guard, which I'm going to post at the door for the school board. We're going to enforce these things because you don't have a right to take away our constitutional rights. What's another example of the state taking its responsibilities into its own hands? One of the things that Shane just talked about was Article 4 of the Constitution, which guarantees that every state shall have a Republican form of government. Small r, Shane, sorry, I'll agree with you on that. Small r, Republican form of government. But what is the very next phrase? That the United States government guarantees that it will protect the states from invasion. Are we being invaded right now, folks? Are we being protected? No. Then do we have a right to protect our sovereign borders and to stand up for our freedom? Regard to who we do. And like Governor Abbott is talking about in Texas, we're going to do the same thing in Arizona. If the federal government's not going to build a wall, then we'll get it done. Whatever it takes. If we have to offset and put it on state land, so be it. If we have to negotiate with the Native American tribes, we'll do it. But we have a right to protect our sovereign borders as well. Do we have a right to arrest those that violate our state laws? Yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. One of the things that they did in Texas, I'd like to get through the state legislature here as well. And that is this idea. In Texas, if you declare a disaster area, then the penalties for for breaking certain laws go way up through the roof. And the penalties are incarceration instead of just fines. Right. And so what they did was declare the counties that have the most problem with illegal immigration disaster areas. And then when you violate state trespass laws, you're incarcerated. We're going to do the same thing here in Arizona. And we're going to send a message to those people that want to come here illegally that Joe Biden may have put out a welcome mat for the United States. And he may be promising that you're going to pay for your health care, but it don't apply to Arizona. Don't come here because you're going to arrest your butts. And I believe that we can get this done. The last thing that I just want to talk about is the 3 things that I want you to know that I'm going to stand for more than anything. One is protection, and I've talked about the border. The second thing is standing up for the people in law enforcement. Yes. In this state, if any city, and don't think it can't happen, in the city of Phoenix, why do you think that the Department of Justice is investigating the city of Phoenix Police Department? Why do you think it's happening? It's a backdoor way to try to defund the police, to try to discredit what the police are doing. And I'll tell you something. Any city that defunds the police, we will pass a law in the state legislature. I will lead that charge that will say this. if you defund in any way your police departments, you're going to lose your state funding.
Yes.
And it's a big deal. It's into the millions and millions and millions of dollars. The second thing that we're not going to tolerate in this state is any cities that are going to do away with qualified immunity. Why does that matter? There's a big talk right now among the liberals of taking away qualified immunity. Would you have become a law enforcement officer if you didn't have qualified immunity? You want to explain to the people what qualified immunity is? I think they need to know. I'll go ahead. Okay, qualified immunity basically means that a law enforcement officer cannot be sued privately when they're engaged in their job.
Yes.
If they're protecting their lives, protecting their partner's life, or protecting your life, they can't be sued. The liberals want to take that away. No law enforcement officer will ever want to put on the badge if we take away that right for them, because then they're going to have second thoughts. And when you have second thoughts, the most important rule of law enforcement is violated. You don't come home alive at the end of the day. And that's not going to happen in our state. The third thing on protection, we're going to make sure our elections have integrity. And how are we going to do that? I put out a 10-point plan. So first and foremost, we got to make permanent the ban on ballot harvesting. It cannot happen in the state. Second, no ID in this state, no vote. Within the last 60 days, you can't change the terms of the election.
Yes.
We get back to precinct voting. But I'm asking this too, folks. These are the things I want to do long-term with elections. But I'm asking this from the bottom of my heart, and I'm asking this from the state legislature. I believe Ducey. I can't get it done as governor right now because I'm not governor. So I'm calling on Ducey. If you want something to call on him for as well, please do this. Call on Ducey to do a special session. They need to do a special session so we can fix our election now. And for this next election, let's get rid of machines. Okay? This next election, can't vote, same day voting, and back to the precinct voting. The second thing that has to happen in that special session is medical freedom.
Yes.
It goes without saying that if I were governor today, we would not be allowing any kind of enforcement for this idiotic, unconstitutional idea that Biden came up with to have OSHA force companies with 100 or more employees to have force their employees to have injections. Would not be enforced in Arizona under our leadership. But the second piece that I want you to know is that we've got to pass a law right now, because there are a lot of people that are going to lose their jobs in the hospitals, in the airlines, in companies that are forcing these mandates. And what I'm calling on the legislature to do, what they need to do, is to pass a law just like Montana's, that if you require vaccinations at your place of employment, you're violating the state's discrimination standards. You can't do it in this state. You gotta do that. The second thing I want to talk about is the economy. And I'm a big Art Laffer guy. I don't know if you remember who he is, father of the Laffer curve.
Yes.
I believe in supply-side economics. When you cut taxes, revenues grow. President Reagan did that. President Trump did that. And the revenues grew. I want to get rid of our income tax in this state. So that we can compete with other states like Florida, Texas, Nevada. And we will not raise taxes. We will make up those revenues because we'll be beating business off with a stick. Instead of flying over us to go to Austin, these high-tech businesses are going to stay in Arizona. We'll have high-paying jobs. They pay property taxes. They pay sales taxes. And we'll grow our revenues the old-fashioned way by having a business climate that's friendly, where government stays off of businesses' backs. And I think that's going to be a really great boon for us. The third thing, and this is a silver bullet, is education. Look, whether it's critical race theory or whether it's the latest woke Marxist theory being pushed by the teachers union, we've got to stand and get back to the basics: reading, writing, math, science, civics,
Yes.
and vocational education. We've got to take that. But there's no guarantee that the public schools are going to do the things that we keep telling them to do. We pass law after law after law, and they don't abide by anything. So how are we going to change things? Competition. Competition. We're going to basically give every parent the right to decide where their kids are going to go to school and take their tax dollars with them. And then when parents start voting with their feet and saying, you know what, if we're going to teach crap to my kids, I'm pulling my kids and we're going to another school, the teachers will figure it out. If we don't correct our ways, we're going to be out of a job. And that's the only way that things are going to be fixed in this state. And I know the teachers union doesn't like me at all, and I'm proud of that. The other thing I want to see happen in the public schools is merit pay. Right now in the public schools, everybody gets paid based on how many years service they've had. Everybody gets a raise every year. That's the way the teachers union makes it happen. Does that work anywhere but the Soviet Union or China? No. You don't pay everybody the same thing. Really good teachers ought to be able to get really good pay. Really crappy teachers ought to be shown the door. And mediocre teachers who want to strive for better, maybe they shouldn't get a raise at all. Right. That's the way things work in the real world. You got to turn it around. So anyway, folks, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate being here tonight. But the most important thing I want you to walk away understanding is that we need a governor with a backbone that's going to stand up to the federal government. You're right, it's been happening for 100 years. But if we stand up, and I'll give you an example, a real life example. We may or may not agree with the issue, but I'm going to give you an example on how nullification really works. There is a federal law against usage of marijuana, but several states have passed legalization of marijuana. Are they coming beating down our doors? No, they're not. Because when you stand with strength, they abide by that. I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying I agree with the legalization of marijuana. All I'm saying is that the idea of standing for what we believe for our constituents, it'll fly. You just have to have the strength and the will to stand up and say, this is how we're going to do it. And we're not going to keep doing what you tell us to do. And I believe with all my heart it will happen. I've spoken with Ron DeSantis. He and I started the Freedom Caucus together. He's a great friend. I've spoken to Greg Abbott. I've spoken to Kristi Noem. If enough of us governors lock arms and tell the federal government, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to take our country back. And I wish I could tell you that things will change in Washington. They'll never pass term limits on themselves. They will never pass a balanced budget amendment. They will never, ever even pass the REINS Act that I was talking about with you. They won't even pass a bill to audit the Fed. It's really frustrating. If we want our government back, we're going to have to do it one state at a time. And we're going to have to elect leaders with spines, steel spines, that are willing to fight on principle. And if you want to know if I'm willing to do it, go look at my record. I'm running against lots of people that say a lot of good stuff, but if you want somebody to get it done, elect somebody that's done it before. Somebody that actually is willing to vote the way that they say they're going to vote. And when I'm going to go back again, they keep their word even when it hurts. When I said I was going to serve 3 terms and leave, I won my last term with over 70% of the vote. I could have stayed many, many more years if I wanted to. But I gave my word. Amen. And as I'm telling you tonight, what I've told you tonight, you can put it in blood because I'm giving my word. These are the things that I'm going to fight for. I'm going to fight for our freedom. I'm going to fight for the Constitution. I'm going to fight for getting our freedoms back, and you can take that to the bank. So thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here tonight.